The ridgeline didn't collapse slowly. It ceased to exist. One moment there was a mountain. Then there was a column of superheated pressure moving upward through 300 feet of limestone at the speed of sound. And then there was nothing where a command center used to be. No radar sweep detected the weapon that caused it. No interceptor battery received a launch order. No alarm reached the operators, who were still at their stations when the delayed fuse initiated. The S-300 batteries flanking the entrance remained cold. Their display screens froze mid-sweep, locked on a sky that showed nothing, which was the last data they would ever collect. 41 years of classified construction and somewhere north of $6 billion in hardening, concealment, and redundant infrastructure reduced to a compression event in 97 seconds. The analysts who covered this region spent years arguing about what Iran was hiding in the geology of the Strait of Hormuz corridor. Most of them were right about the existence of something. Almost none of them were right about the depth of it. Because the thing about an adversary who has been practicing denial and deception operations for 4 decades is that by the time you think you understand what they are concealing, you are looking at the layer they intended you to find. The real asset is always one layer further down. To understand why the command center died while its defenders were still processing the pre-dawn status reports on their consoles, you have to travel 22,000 miles straight up. The U.S. Space Force is the least understood branch of the American military, and the most consequential one operating in this theater right now. Most people's mental model of military space assets is Cold War vintage. Early warning satellites watching for missile plumes, communications relays, GPS for navigation. That model is 2 generations out of date. The infrared sensor arrays currently deployed in geosynchronous orbit above the Persian Gulf region are not watching for missile launches. They are watching for heat. All heat. The resolution and sensitivity of these systems, the specifics of which remain classified, is publicly characterized only through what they have been demonstrated to detect in open source reporting. What the public record supports is this. These sensors can resolve a thermal signature consistent with a diesel generator exhaust vent at a target distance that makes every assumption about underground concealment obsolete. The civilian metaphor that comes closest to Deverjine, capturing it. Imagine standing on the observation deck of a building in Washington, D.C., and being able to see a single lit match being struck on the steps of a building in New York City. Not a fire, not a floodlight, a match. Now imagine that capability operating continuously, processing every square meter of the target country's surface simultaneously, feeding into an analysis system that compares each frame against the previous frame and flags any thermal change that was not there before. That is what Iran's underground infrastructure looks like to the sensor layer operating above the Strait of Hormuz tonight. Every generator that powers a subterranean facility creates a thermal return at its exhaust point. Every air handling system that keeps an underground operations center at a functional temperature creates a signature at its ventilation shaft. The mountain does not hide the heat. The mountain funnels it to the surface at predictable points. And those points have been mapped, cataloged, and loaded into targeting systems that operate faster than any human decision cycle Iran has available. The irreplaceable thing Iran was hiding in the Hormuz corridor was not a missile stockpile. Those can be rebuilt. It was not a radar installation. Those can be replaced. What Iran was hiding was the integrated command and control node that served as the central processing architecture for the entire regional military network. The facility that received sensor data from every radar and surveillance platform in the theater, fused it into a single operational picture, and distributed targeting solutions and fire orders to every battery, every naval asset, and every air defense unit within range. Destroy a missile stockpile and Iran loses inventory. Destroy the command node and Iran loses the ability to use everything it still has. The distinction matters enormously, and the planners who identified this facility as the primary target understood it precisely. But the command center was buried. And it was buried specifically because Iran understood that any facility accessible from the surface was a facility the kill web could reach. The depth was not incidental. It was the entire defensive theory. If you go deep enough, no weapon can reach you. If no weapon can reach you, you are strategically invulnerable. If you are strategically invulnerable, You can operate the regional military network from inside that facility indefinitely, regardless of what happens above ground. The theory was built against the weapons that existed when the facility was designed. It was tested against the weapon that was developed after the facility was finished, the GBU-57AB Massive Ordnance Penetrator is 30,000 pounds of hardened steel and precisely delayed explosive chemistry. Its penetrator body is heat-treated to a Rockwell hardness specification that allows it to maintain structural integrity through the compressive forces generated by high-velocity impact with reinforced concrete. It enters a target at speeds above 1,000 miles per hour and uses its kinetic energy to continue moving downward through material that would stop any conventional bomb on the first foot of contact. The fuse does not initiate on impact. It initiates after the penetrator has stopped moving, which happens after it has reached the depth at which the delayed charge can do maximum structural damage to whatever is below. Against a facility buried under 300 feet of mountain, this sequence produces an outcome that the facility's architects modeled as impossible. The weapon reaches them. The weapon detonates at depth. The pressure wave from the detonation follows the path of least resistance through the tunnel network, and the path of least resistance inside an underground command center is the network of passages that connects every room to every other room. The blast does not blow outward. It travels inward and then outward along the facility's own architecture, using the engineers' work against them. This is why the S-300 batteries outside the entrance never fired. There was nothing to fire at. The B-21 Raider that delivered the weapon does not produce a radar return that the Bavar 373 or the S-300 PMU-2 can resolve and track at the altitudes and distances involved in this engagement. Its radar cross-section at operational range is not small. It is functionally undetectable against the background clutter of the atmosphere by the hardware Iran has deployed. The weapon was already falling when the nearest Iranian air defense radar completed its most recent sweep of the approach corridor and found nothing. But the physical strike was the final act of a sequence that had been running for 72 hours before the first weapon fell. Because a facility can be located precisely enough to target only if the sensors watching it have had time to build the picture that confirms the location, and building that picture against a target that has been practicing concealment for 4 decades requires something more than a single pass by an infrared satellite. The process that produced the targeting solution used tonight operates on a principle that the intelligence community calls pattern of life analysis. And the AI systems currently processing Space Force sensor data have extended this concept into a domain that has no historical precedent. Project Maven, the Department of Defense's AI-driven targeting intelligence program, does not look for anomalies in a single frame of sensor data. It looks for deviations from established patterns across thousands of frames collected over weeks and months. The thermal signatures produced by the Hormuz Command Center's power and ventilation systems were not visible in any single observation. They were visible as a statistical pattern across thousands of observations, a pattern that no human analyst team could have extracted from the data volume involved, but that an AI system processing sensor feeds in real time, identified as a high-confidence subsurface infrastructure signature at a specific coordinate set. What this means in practical terms: Iran's concealment worked against human speed analysis. It did not work against machine speed analysis operating on continuous sensor feeds. The facility was hidden from human observers. It was not hidden from an algorithm that was specifically trained to find it by looking at what the mountain's surface does over time, rather than what it looks like at any single moment. The exhaust patterns, the subtle thermal variations at specific surface coordinates across multiple weather conditions, the faint electromagnetic signatures produced by the facility's power infrastructure at frequencies that pass through rock but are detectable from orbit with the right receiver. Each individual signal was below the threshold of confident identification. The combination of all of them across the observation period produced a confidence interval that justified the strike authorization. The Iranian commanders inside that facility had no warning because the system that found them never probably Pastin al-Sham announced itself. There was no probe they could detect and respond to. There was no signature they could suppress to avoid discovery. The sensors looking for them were looking for the unavoidable byproducts of the facility's own operation, and those byproducts could not be eliminated without shutting down the facility itself, which would have achieved the same outcome as being struck. They could not hide the heat of the machines that kept them alive. While the Space Force was providing the vision and the AI was providing the targeting confidence, U.S. Cyber Command and the Joint Cyber Operations Element were running a parallel operation against the Surface Air Defense Network that was supposed to protect the facility's approach corridor. Not a broad communications disruption. The approach was more precise. The Bavar 373 batteries protecting the corridor operate their fire control systems on encrypted data links that require continuous authentication, handshakes between the radar unit, the command post, and the missile launcher. Cyber Command's operation targeted the authentication protocol itself, introducing a timing corruption that caused the handshake to fail intermittently in a way that each battery's diagnostic system logged as a hardware fault rather than an external intrusion. By the time the B-21 reached its release point, the 3 Bavar batteries covering the primary approach had been cycling through authentication failure and reset sequences for 4 hours. Their operators had logged maintenance tickets and were waiting for the morning technical team. They were not in a ready posture to engage a target they could not detect anyway. This is the sequence that the adversary has never been able to fully account for, because each element of it is individually deniable and collectively overwhelming. The satellite finds the target. The AI confirms the target. The cyber operation neutralizes the defenses. The stealth platform delivers the weapon. No single element of this chain is visible to the adversary until the last step. And by the last step, there is nothing left to do with the visibility. Iran's response in the hours following the strike was the confirmation that the targeting analysis was correct. The regional military network that should have generated a coordinated retaliatory launch across multiple asset types instead produced fragmented, uncoordinated individual actions by units that had lost their command and control architecture and were operating on pre-planned contingency orders rather than real-time direction. Ballistic missiles launched from mobile platforms without updated targeting data. Drone swarms activated on preset routes toward coordinates that no longer contained the assets they were programmed to find. Coastal batteries engaging radar contacts that turned out to be electronic decoys generated by EA-18G Growlers that had been orbiting the engagement zone since before the primary strike. The retaliatory effort was not suppressed by the coalition's defensive systems. It was rendered incoherent by the removal of the node that would have made it coherent. The Aegis combat systems aboard the strike group handled what remained with the automated efficiency of a system designed for this threat. Density: SM-6 interceptors against the ballistic tracks. Evolved Sea Sparrow against the cruise threats. The carrier's flight operations never paused. The watch rotation on the Abraham Lincoln turned over on schedule. The tactical action officer who logged the engagement noted the final threat cleared and moved to the next item in the queue. By the time the financial markets in London opened, the analysis of what had happened in the Hormuz corridor overnight had already been incorporated into the risk models that price Persian Gulf energy shipping. The insurance premium adjustment was downward. Because the facility that represented the coordination capacity for Iran's regional military network no longer existed, and without that coordination capacity, the threat picture for shipping through the strait had changed in a way that was immediately legible to anyone who understood what the facility actually did. Now look at what this engagement means at the level where the real consequences play out, because the tactical picture is less important than the strategic one. Iran spent $6 billion and 4 decades building a facility designed to be the irreplaceable center of its regional military architecture. Irreplaceable was the operative word. You can rebuild a missile stockpile. You can replace a radar installation. You can repair a damaged naval base. You cannot quickly rebuild a command and control facility that took 40 years to design, excavate, equip, and staff with the personnel who know how to operate it. The institutional knowledge embedded in that facility, the integration work that connected every sensor feed and every weapon system in the regional network into a unified operational picture, does not get reconstructed from a backup server. It gets rebuilt from scratch over a decade, if at all. under conditions that are now less favorable than they were before the facility existed. The coalition spent somewhere in the range of $300 million executing this operation, including all ordnance, sortie costs, and the intelligence collection infrastructure that produced the targeting solution, against a target that represents $6 billion in construction costs and 40 years of institutional development. The return on that investment is not measured in dollars. It is measured in the permanent degradation of Iran's ability to coordinate a regional military campaign at the level of sophistication this facility enabled. The investment in AI-driven targeting intelligence, in Space Force infrared surveillance, in the B-21's low observable capability, in the GBU-57's penetration engineering, paid off in a single operation that removed the most protected asset in the Iranian military's inventory. The fortress had no roof. It had a mountain instead of a roof, which is different and less useful because the weapons built to defeat it do not care about the mountain. For Iran, the lesson arrives too late to apply. The facility was built against the threat model of the decade it was designed in. It was struck by a capability set that was developed specifically in response to facilities like it over the years between when the design was finalized and when the strike happened. The adversary's defensive investment created the demand signal for the offensive investment that defeated it. That is the cycle. Iran funded the GBU-57's development program with its construction choices without knowing it was doing so, and without having any way to reverse the consequence once the weapon existed. The mountain is still there. What was inside it is not. The regional military network it served is operating on contingency protocols that were designed for temporary outages, not permanent loss of the coordinating node. The gap between what those contingency protocols can do and what the facility enabled is the measure of what was lost tonight. That gap will not close quickly. The Strait of Hormuz remains open. The carrier strike group continues its patrol. Somewhere above the Gulf, in the infrared spectrum, invisible to the naked eye, but completely legible to the sensors watching from geosynchronous orbit, the thermal signature of the mountain has changed. The exhaust vents that used to mark the positions of the facility's ventilation shafts are cold. There is nothing below them left to vent. If you want to understand how the Space Force sensor architecture and AI targeting integration actually function in this kind of operation, and what they mean for every underground facility any adversary believes is currently undetectable, subscribe. We break down the real capability, not the declassified summary. And tell me in the comments, if Iran had built a second redundant command node in a completely separate geographic location with no thermal signature overlap, does the targeting chain that found the first one find the second one? Think through what the answer requires before you post it. Because the answer depends on one specific detail about how the AI's pattern of life analysis actually works, and that detail changes everything. The scenario described in this video is a technical and tactical analysis based on real military assets, published defense specifications, and documented regional tensions. The specific operational sequences are hypothetical dramatizations created to illustrate U.S. Space Force, Cyber Command, and Air Force integrated targeting and strike doctrine.